When I built my shed, it wasn't just a place to store tools, it was a piece of family history, hand-built by my grandfather more than 60 years ago. Weathered wood, iron nails, and his initials carved into the beam, it wasn't just a shed, it was a legacy. But the HOA didn't see it that way. To them, it was unsightly and not up to code. They ordered me to tear it down. Little did they know, that old shed would outlive their entire authority. Before I dive into this unbelievable fight with the HOA, make sure to hit subscribe. We bring you real, jaw-dropping HOA revenge stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss the twists. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Virginia. It's the kind of place where every lawn looks the same, every mailbox matches, and the HOA has their fingers in everything. Honestly, when my wife and I first moved here, we thought the HOA would protect the community's value. But what we didn't realize was that this HOA wasn't about community, it was about control. At the center of this storm was my shed. You see, my grandfather built that shed with his bare hands in the 1960s. He was a carpenter, a war veteran, and the kind of man who believed in leaving something meaningful behind. That shed wasn't just a pile of wood and nails, it was a piece of him. I used it to store tools, gardening supplies, and sometimes even as a quiet escape to read and remember him. Every creak of the wood reminded me of him. The trouble started when the HOA got a new president, Marjorie. She was the kind of woman who thrived on rules, always with a clipboard in her hand and a fake smile on her lips. The first time she laid eyes on my shed, she wrinkled her nose like she'd smelled something rotten. A week later, I received a letter. Notice of violation, your shed is not in compliance with HOA standards. It must be removed within 30 days. I couldn't believe it. Removed? That shed had stood longer than most of the homes in this neighborhood. It wasn't some new construction. It was part of my family history. I went to the next HOA meeting to plead my case. Marjorie, I said calmly, holding the letter, this shed was built by my grandfather. It's not just a structure, it's a piece of my family's legacy. She gave me a tight smile. We respect history, but unfortunately, personal sentiment does not override community regulations. The shed is an eyesore, and it must go. An eyesore? I snapped. That shed was here before half of these houses were even built. Her voice turned icy. The board has voted. 30 days. Tear it down, or we will fine you $100 per day until it's removed. The room went silent. A few neighbors looked at me with sympathy, but no one dared speak up. Marjorie had that effect on people. I went home fuming. My wife tried to calm me down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about the shed. This was about power. Marjorie wanted control, and she thought I'd be an easy target. Well, she picked the wrong man. The next day, I started researching. I dug into old property records, county archives, even local newspapers. And what I found made my jaw drop. That shed wasn't just my family's history, it was part of the town's history. My grandfather had been one of the original settlers in this area after the war. He and a few others built several structures, including my shed, which had been featured in a 1970s article about local craftsmanship. Even better? The shed technically qualified as a historical structure under state law. My heart raced as I pieced it all together. If I played this right, the HOA couldn't just force me to tear it down, they'd have to protect it. The next HOA meeting was only 2 weeks away. In the meantime, the letters kept coming. First it was fines, then threats of legal action. Marjorie even had the audacity to come to my house, standing in my yard with her clipboard, demanding to know when I'd comply. I smiled at her, calm and collected. Oh, don't worry, Marjorie. The shed isn't going anywhere. She frowned. You're digging yourself into a hole. When the fines pile up, you'll regret this. But little did she know, I was already 2 steps ahead. By the time the meeting rolled around, I had gathered everything, photographs, newspaper clippings, property records, and even a letter from the local historical society. They were thrilled that I'd reached out and said they would be happy to investigate the shed for official landmark designation. The night of the meeting, the HOA board sat smugly at their table, Marjorie in the middle like a queen on her throne. "Mr. Allen," she began, her voice dripping with false politeness, "we're here again to discuss your non-compliant shed. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we move forward with fines?" I stood, my folder of documents in hand. "Yes, actually. I have quite a bit to say." I laid out the photos, the clippings, and the records. I could see the color drain from Marjorie's face as I spoke. "This shed," I said firmly, "is not just a family heirloom. It's a piece of this community's history. My grandfather built it before most of these homes even existed. And according to state law, it qualifies for landmark protection." I paused, letting that sink in. In fact, the Historical Society is already reviewing my application. Once approved, this shed won't just be legal, it'll be untouchable. And if the HOA continues to harass me, they'll be interfering with state-recognized heritage. The room erupted in whispers. Neighbors who'd once stayed silent now leaned forward, interested. Some even smiled. Marjorie's face tightened, her knuckles white on the table. This is highly irregular." "No," I said with a grin. "What's irregular is trying to demolish a historical landmark. Maybe you should have done your homework before picking this fight." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't ready to go against me in front of everyone. And for the first time, I realized I was winning. But this was only the beginning. Because the Historical Society wasn't just going to protect my shed, they were about to elevate it. The court date finally arrived. I had gathered every scrap of documentation, from the photographs of my grandfather working on the shed to letters from local historians who vouched for its significance. The HOA strutted into the courtroom like they were certain victory was theirs. Their president, Linda, had that smug grin plastered on her face, the one I'd grown to despise over the months of harassment. When the judge called the case, the HOA lawyer jumped right in. He painted a picture of my shed as an eyesore, an illegal structure, and a threat to the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. He even suggested it lowered property values for everyone on the street. I let him finish. Then it was my turn. I stood, hands slightly trembling, but my voice steady. "Your Honor, this isn't just a shed. It's a piece of my family's history. My grandfather built it in the 1940s, long before the HOA even existed. It was constructed with materials salvaged from the old train station downtown, which no longer stands. This shed is a living piece of our town's past." I submitted the letters from the local historical society and the photos of my grandfather building it. The judge looked through them carefully. Linda shifted in her chair. Then I brought up the big reveal. "Your Honor, 2 weeks ago, the Historical Preservation Committee formally recognized this shed as a candidate for landmark status. They believe it qualifies as a historical structure due to its age, materials, and ties to our town's heritage." The room fell silent. The HOA's lawyer stammered. That can't be possible." But it was. I handed the judge the official documentation. The moment he read the seal on the letter, his eyebrows lifted, and I knew he had turned the tide. The judge leaned back in his chair, staring directly at the HOA board. "So, let me get this straight. You've been trying to demolish a structure that the town itself now recognizes as historically significant? Do you understand the legal repercussions of that?" Linda's smug grin disappeared. The judge dismissed their complaint immediately. But he didn't stop there. He ruled that the HOA had overstepped their authority by harassing me and ordered them to cover my legal fees. He also warned them that if they attempted to interfere with the shed again, they'd be in violation of preservation laws, which could result in heavy fines. When we left the courthouse, I didn't even bother looking at Linda. She looked furious, but powerless. A month later, the shed was officially declared a historical landmark. The HOA couldn't touch it, even if they wanted to. Better yet, the town actually added it to their list of heritage walking tours. Every Saturday, groups of curious visitors strolled past my yard, admiring the little wooden shed that the HOA had tried so hard to erase. The irony was delicious. The very thing they wanted destroyed had now become untouchable, a legally protected landmark. Their rules no longer applied to me. Neighbors started seeing the HOA for what they really were, bullies drunk on their own power. Slowly, more people began standing up to them. And with every visitor who snapped a photo of my shed or asked about its history, the HOA's influence shrank a little more. One afternoon, I caught Linda walking by with two of her board members. They glared at the shed, muttering under their breath, while a group of tourists admired it. I couldn't resist leaning over the fence. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said with a smile. Linda's face turned red, but she said nothing. For once, she had no power, no control, and it was glorious. As for me, I still keep the shed just as my grandfather left it. Every time I walk inside, I feel his presence, his determination, and his pride. The HOA tried to erase a piece of my family's story, but instead, they helped preserve it forever. And that's the sweetest revenge of all.